Hello, hello, hello. Welcome into the Fantasy Live Show. We are so excited to have you back here with us, Kendall, Valenzuela, and the one and only Ian Hartitz, who always tells you it's a great day to be great. And it is, Ian, because we get to talk about rookies and some potential bounce backs today. How you doing? How's it going?
Stole my line a little bit there, Kendall, but it's cool. It is indeed a great day to be great. Guys, it was also a great day, hanging out with you in real life, actually, last week down there in New Orleans. So a little bit colder here in, not so sunshiny Columbus, Ohio, but Costa Rica on the horizon for your boy. And yeah, some rookie talk in the meantime.
I love that. And we're still going to be getting Ian Hartitz tweets from Costa Rica, just different locations, same Ian. I think.
They're just scheduled throughout the year. I surprise myself sometimes with, what pops up. You forget about something. It's not as funny as you remembered it, but, that's just life.
That's incredible. And it was fun to hang out with you last week. That New Orleans was fun. You came back a couple days afterwards, but I don't know about you. I love New Orleans. Like, we didn't get to try as much food as we would have wanted to because everyone was just so busy. But the food, if I stayed there for a full week, not having to do anything, Ian, I'd be plus 40. It would have been bad.
It was scary scenes, stepping on the old scale at the gym the other day. But you know what? Small setback. America loves a comeback. It's all good.
All right. Well, today we are talking about not only Costa Rica, but rookies as well, and some potential bounce backs that we could see. We've got 10 of these rookies. Before we get into them, though, we're not talking about Brian Thomas Jr. We're not talking about Malik Neighbors. How did you kind of find these 10 guys to kind of break down today?
Yeah, basically only stuck to, with the exception of Jatavian Sanders, spoiler, only stuck to guys that had that, top 3 round draft capital. Had to have some expectations, before we could officially call them a disappointment. But also remember, each player had those different, just expectations coming into the year. So yes, we will be talking about Marvin Harrison Jr., even though he did obviously have a good, by most accounts, rookie season. Wasn't good relative to where we were drafting him in Fantasyland. So I know producer Swing's going to, be reeling a little bit with our first topic of conversation here. But again, want to stress that it's more so disappointing relative to those expectations than necessarily being a quote unquote bad real life player.
Yeah, I'm going to be tilting when we talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. because that 1-2 turn pick ADP did not help me in fantasy drafts last year, but that's what we're here for today, to figure out if these 10 rookies will actually, now going into their sophomore seasons, bounce back for 2025. So let's get into it, Ian. Let's start with the duo for Matt Swing, our producer here, and figure out if Caleb Williams and Odunze will bounce back. Let's start with the guy that maybe people have a lot of expectations for in Caleb Williams. What did you see last season, and what are your expectations potentially for 2025?
Bear down, reigning QB 20 in fantasy points per game. Not great, Kendall. Someone that we were drafting right there with Jaden Daniels kind of on that QB1 borderline. Obviously, one wound up leading his fantasy managers to plenty of hardware down the stretch. The other one, not so much. But I do want to say with Caleb, as I'm sure Bears fans are well aware, there were some highs. I mean, if you look at before that bye, this was a 4-2 football team, and we had back-to-back games against some lowly opponents. I get it, but we did have those instances of Caleb looking a lot like the, quote unquote generational talent that he was allowed to be. The problem was, whether you want to blame Shane Waldron, whether you want to blame the offensive line, whether you want to blame Caleb himself, it was just really just a roller coaster of ups and downs throughout the entire season. So on the one hand, Kendall, I am just happy that we did see some of those flashes, but man, this dude needs to, again, just try to raise up that floor, because it was absolutely killer for us in Fantasyland. So with all these situations, again, want to try to look at how they did last year, but also what could change going ahead into 2025. And the one thing I know we can agree on, Kendall, is that you could not have asked for a better coaching change with Mr. Ben Johnson now in town.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at Caleb Williams, it's easy to say, all right, well, he was just bad, right? He was supposed to be the Bears' first 4,000-yard passer. By the way, yeah, that's still a stat. 4,000 yards is the bar. The bar is the floor, Ian. When it comes to Caleb Williams, he was sacked, though, 68 times. So not only am I excited about, Ben Johnson coming over, but what they're going to do in the draft as well. They have to look at the offensive line just the same way we can say for the Seattle Seahawks. Like, you have to put money into those situations. Caleb Williams held the ball a little bit too long. He lost 466 yards on sacks, fourth most yards lost on sacks ever, by the way. So I'm with you. I think The discount, though, that's what's going to be interesting with all these rookies too. When we're going, and we're sickos, we're already drafting right now. But when you go into drafts, especially on Underdog, like I will take the discount and I'll say, okay, I want to believe that Ben Johnson's going to come in. He's going to use Rome Odunze, who we're going to talk about here in a second, DJ Moore, potentially Keenan Allen if he doesn't leave, and get really good things out of Caleb Williams. But the sacks it can't be that bad next year, right? It can't be.
And look, Caleb was at fault for plenty of those, but PFF actually does a good job of assigning blame for each individual sack that happens, and even taking away the ones that they did say was Caleb's fault. This offensive line, allowed more sacks than any other group in the league. So that was the reason why that was the number one team need for my Bears team, not team preview, but team needs column. You can find it on fantasylife.com. I almost got quirky, Kendall, and just did, team need number one, offensive tackle, number two, guard, number three, center, but decided to expand on that a little bit more. But the big thing is just, again, how he kind of is just, and honestly, this was the issue coming out of USC, how he responds to pressure. Because, man, the guy, it's not like he's a statue in the pocket. In fact, if you wanted to go ahead and count up the amount of sacks he actually avoided, I'm sure he'd be near the top of that list. But again, it is that pesky pressure to sack ratio. And last year, only guy worse than him was Will Levis. But the only guy worse than, both of these quarterbacks over the past 5 years was Baker Mayfield. And he did find a way to figure that out over the course of, especially of his Tampa Bay career. So with Caleb, again, hoping Ben Johnson keeps him on track, and just hopefully, Kendall, presses those easy buttons. It's one of those things that I know Dwayne likes to talk about as well. And you do look at it. Stephen Patton's a really good follow on Twitter. Patton Analytics has a lot of cool charts and stuff. And he actually did kind of chart which offenses do make the most use of those easy buttons, the RPOs, the screens, the play action passes. And Ben Johnson was number 2 in that last season. So again, hopeful that, again, in this case, we have a player who did show some highs, obviously had some lows too, but now adding in that new scheme, hopefully adding in, a spruced up offensive line should be enough to turn it around. So I'm with you. Again, not going to sit here and be citing February ADP over and over again, but I am guessing he's going to be going, QB 18 or lower by the time we make it to August. And all of a sudden, that's a late round dart. That's someone who's not even going to be getting drafted likely in a lot of these one quarterback 12 team leagues. So I'm with you, K-Dog. Optimistic that 2025 will be much better for Mr. Caleb.
Let's hope so. I mean, Ben Johnson, too, his offense threw the ball 54.7% of the time in those 3 seasons. And then you look at how Jared Goff finished. Jared Goff, by the way, it shocked me this morning, so I have to tell you, is going as QB 8 off the board in best ball drafts right now, which, again, we're not going to cite underdog ADPs in February, but that was a little bit sick to see. But Jared Goff did finish 10-7-6 in fantasy points at the quarterback position under Ben Johnson. So there is hopefully hope for not only Bears fans, but for Caleb Williams managers as well. The other side of this conversation, though, please tell me something nice about Rome Odunze. Please say that Rome Odunze is going to be amazing, because I had my bags of Rome Odunze were heavy last season, thinking not only that Keenan Allen might go down with an injury, but I just thought overall that Rome Odunze was a more talented, obviously younger player. So what are your expectations for him in 2025?
And again, this is where it's kind of funny how we view how the players perform relative to those expectations, because Marvin Harrison Jr. had a better season than Rome Odunze, even though they basically end up having the same volume. And I don't think we can sit here and say Kyler or Caleb Williams were necessarily great, throwers of the football there in 2024 at least. But the difference, obviously, is we were drafting Marvin Harrison Jr., as you said, at that round 1, round 2 turn. Rome was a bit more of a dart at that like wide receiver 36 or so ADP. But unfortunately, Kendall, we're talking about the guy that finished wide receiver 59 in PPR points per game. That was worse than Jalen Tolbert, worse than Demario Douglas. That is absolutely brutal to see. However, maybe, just maybe, and I don't want to be the victim of the boy who cried the Cooper Kupp role or Amon-Ra St. Brown role, but maybe we do see Rome actually get those easier reps in the slot, because we did see a nice little enhancement in his performance when that was the case. You look at him overall in yards per route run last season, it was not pretty. He was 11th, in yards per route run among 12 rookie wide receivers, 10th in passer rating when targeted. Like, it wasn't exactly a pretty situation when they were throwing him the football. However, looking at a bigger sample, 89 total wide receivers, he was actually 43rd in yards per route run from the slot, dipped down to 77th out wide. So not trying to say he's a slot merchant or anything, but it's easier, okay? You can play the Steelers for the last decade and you're getting a linebacker on you half the time if you're lining up, on the inside of the formation. So again, just kind of persisting along with the idea that Ben Johnson's going to not only make life easier for Caleb Williams, but the entire offense. However, unlike with Caleb, Kendall, I don't think we're really going to be getting a discount here with Rome. Maybe that could change if Keenan Allen decides to go back to the Windy City. But I mean, again, if we're going to have to be paying a top 30 price tag for this guy, that's tough because DJ Moore, for me, still very much profiling as that number one wide receiver. And as much as the efficiency of the Bears offense should go up, I mean, you mentioned that Lions pass play rate, that's pretty low in the grand scheme of things. So expecting a more run-heavy Bears offense, and I would like to think that Rome's going to take a step up. Can't get much lower than what we saw last year, but in terms of expecting, these top 10, top 12 heights that you were probably hoping for when they drafted him in the top 10, yeah, it's a little bit tougher for me to get behind.
And I think that's the most important part when we're talking about drafts and where these guys are going, is that you have to you have to maybe think, okay, is he going to outperform his ADP? Like, you want to get these guys that could have these bounce back seasons, but if the price is already baked into having the bounce back season, then you're probably buying him at his ceiling, which is something that we don't necessarily want, especially down in that range. So, and look, the target competition, that's the one thing where I thought, and maybe Ian, it's just us, and we just need to, wherever Shane Waldron goes, we just fade Shane Waldron because it's just, I should have seen it from the Seattle Seahawks. It reminded me so much of the Seattle Seahawks 2023, right? It was JSN, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and nothing worked out there. And what do we see in 2024? A little JSN breakout when Shane Waldron's out of the building. So the target competition for sure. With DJ Moore, I agree with you, wide receiver one in that offense. But if Keenan Allen is on the move, people are going to get a little bit excited, and he might get too expensive. Even for me, as someone that, like, my whole family went to UW, loved it. I got my mom his jersey for Mother's Day, like right after he was drafted, but he could be getting kind of expensive, especially if Keenan Allen's on the move.
It's kind of like that Grim Reaper meme, but Shane Waldron's face, and like unfortunately knocked on JSN's door, then knocked on Rome's door, and now he's going for Brian Thomas Jr. down there in Jacksonville. So don't freak out, Jags fans. I think BTJ is going to be just fine. He's only the passing game coordinator. Liam Cohen's going to be calling plays. But it is one of those things though with Rome where, again, I don't want to just assume everything's going to be fine purely because you changed the play caller, because you start listening to some of the play callers, Kendall. I think it was actually Mike McDaniel, someone we consider, I think, one of the better offensive minds in football. And he almost said the play calling is one of the most overrated parts of football, because he was just speaking to the amount of plays he's called over the years where you feel fantastic when you call it and then something, implodes and it doesn't work out. Meanwhile, you call another play where all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, they have the perfect coverage, and it actually works out. So Jims and Joes over X's and O's. Not saying Rome's going to be a bust, but again, really was a bad data point. Now, I know fantasy points, a lot of great work over there. Shout out to Scott Barrett and company. They did, speak a lot to the uncatchable variety of, Rome's air yards, him and Calvin Ridley really topping the league, and, just missed opportunities downfield. But man, just having watched all of Rome's targets throughout the season, not like it was just time and time again where he's breaking wide open downfield and getting these uncatchable targets. A lot of them, again, seem to be tightly covered as well. And I think that's reflected in ESPN's open score, where he did have the lowest among the three Bears wide receivers. So again, trajectory of the Bears offense, the team as a whole going up. But for Rome Odunze, if we're going to have a hard time, again, expecting more than, 100, 110 targets, I'm not sure I can get, behind a top 20, top 24 valuation.
Well, someone that was being way valued in that range, actually the 1-2 turn, that's where he was going for Marvin Harrison Jr. last season. It wasn't even there. I mean, he was drafted as a top receiver that you could, like I said, I was getting him at the turn, and I thought, Ian, I was like, oh, this is immaculate. This is phenomenal. I'm getting Marvin Harrison Jr. at the turn. This is great. It's going to go great with Kyler Murray, who's going to have a bounce back season last season. That's what we thought. But man, that did not come true. You can see on your screen, wide receiver 44 finish, and it was beyond disappointing. The connection, it feels like, with Kyler Murray just never got going. And I know you and Dwayne have talked a lot about, the height stuff with Kyler Murray, but especially last season where you guys were just like, it doesn't seem like he saw him half the time. What did you see from 2024, and what are your expectations? Please say that we get a bounce back Marvin Harrison Jr. season.
Hope so, K-Dog. But man, Quentin Johnston scored more PPR points per game than Mr. Marvin Harrison Jr. That's a fact. That actually happened there. So again, the height stuff with Kyler, it's fun to make jokes, show those, small NFL player memes or that little car buzzing around the highway. Like, I get it. It's a good time. But you see instances of him just not really being able to see over the line of scrimmage, and accordingly, just their entire quick passing game, everything in rhythm. It just seems so tough in Arizona. And accordingly, the most successful part of that offense really over the course of these past 2 seasons has been the play breaking down, and then Kyler playing, more or less playground football with Trey McBride. So that was the surprising part here, because pushing aside the whole just, generational Marvin Harrison Jr., whatever you thought of him as a prospect and whatnot, like my reason for at least drafting him on a few squads wasn't super overweight or anything like that, but it was just settling into an offense with a quarterback in Kyler Murray, who we thought had 4,000 plus yard upside with almost no other target competition at wide receiver. The problem was Trey McBride just basically took over that number 1 pass game option role and never looked back from it. So this is the trickier part, Kendall, because again, for Caleb and even Rome, we can say, okay, we got Ben Johnson in town. We can spruce up the offensive line. We can make these improvements that can make, a year 2 breakout, at least for Rome, that much more clear. What's going to change in Arizona? It's going to be a little bit of a cheaper ADP for Marv. I get that, but man, looking at him last year, he wound up being a boomer bust wide receiver 3 more weeks than not. And to say it's going to immediately change next year, I don't know. Could he come down with a few more of the slot fades, get a little bit more chemistry with Kyler? Okay, I guess, but Trey McBride's not going anywhere. Drew Petzing is back. If anything, I think they could actually bring in a bit more target competition, replacing Greg Dortch, who's going to be hitting free agency. So again, would like to think he comes down with some more of those 50-50 balls, but maybe a situation where we should just be happy with the Cardinals' run game and just honestly not expect too much out of everyone other than Trey McBride.
That's not what I wanted to hear, but I understand. It's like I understand it. I saw Thor Nystrom has mocked Luther Burden in every single one of his mocks, and I'm sitting back here and thinking, okay, like you're getting out targeted by Trey McBride, who for all intents and purposes had a phenomenal season, but then you add another weapon to this pass game. And I say to myself, okay, even with the discount for Marvin Harrison Jr., you get another piece of competition in there. And you, like you just said, we love drafting, some of us love drafting James Conner, and we're going to talk about some of the running backs here coming up, but like adding Luther Burden, wide receiver out of Missouri, and then you just have this offense that's loaded with pieces, but that's something that we don't necessarily want, right? That almost feels like a poor man's, San Francisco 49ers, where you look at them and you say, there's a lot of great guys potentially here, but with the target share, do I really want to go after them? Because they're not all going to outperform their ADP. So that's the tough part with Marvin Harrison. But then I look in and I'm like, he's so damn talented. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. How could he not step up? And maybe all of this is to say that it's on Kyler Murray and what kind of quarterback we see from him, because 2 years ago it was like, all right, he's going to come back and it's going to be healthy. Last year, it just didn't work. He couldn't even string 2 good fantasy games together. It was brutal to watch.
It really was brutal. And again, it's not completely all on Marv. We've talked about the Kyler factor. And also, Drew Petzing, look, Cardinals' run game was fantastic last year, whether it was James Conner, we had the Trey Benson, Amari DiMercato doing their things here and there as well. But like when you look at their just ability to rip off explosive plays, EPA per run, they were right up there with the Ravens as the best rushing attack in football. And Kyler deserves credit for that too. And then that's one of those things, I don't think we give the dual threat, quarterbacks enough credit for their influence on the ground game. But man, Marvin Harrison Jr. for large portions of last season, almost being used as that, sacrificial X that we see in offenses with guys like Alec Pierce, Marquez Valdes-Scantling over the years, Cedric Tillman types of players where, okay, that's fine to have that role in your offense, but not when you draft them 4th overall and expect them to potentially, grow to be one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. So overall, Kendall, per True Media, Marv last season was the only wide receiver with more than 25% of their targets to only come on go routes, with a minimum of 70 targets. So not saying he can't win deep, but the guy didn't run at the combine for a reason. Not saying he's slow, but guess what? If you can run a 4.3, you're going to go ahead and show scouts that you can do that. And again, just the fact that there were really no easy buttons being pushed in this passing game, I would like it to change, but can we just assume it's going to after what we saw last year with no real changes in the coaching staff? I don't know.
Probably not. That's the more disappointing part, is the answer is probably no, unless and listen, he's not necessarily cheap right now. He's still going in the 3rd round. So if I told you Marvin Harrison Jr. or DJ Moore, who would you take?
Probably DJ Moore. I mean, they're going to have an easier time getting him to football. I mean, it was the Seahawks players. It was JSN. I think Akello Witherspoon were getting interviewed the other day. Yeah. And Witherspoon was just saying straight up, players like Mara, who they can win with physicality, he's going to take the guard in them, 9 times out of 10 over someone like a Garrett Wilson, that more twitchy separator who, again, can be a bit harder to deal with. It's not like we were watching Cardinals games last year and saying, oh, man, there's another wide open Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyler sailed it over his head. It was more so these slot fades time and time again where it's okay, yeah, if you could put the ball in a perfect spot, you probably could have come down with it, but not making life easy on either party.
Let's go to the San Francisco 49ers, because this is a really interesting conversation for bounce back. I mean, for everything that we've talked about, like Ricky Pearsall already bounced back because we were able to see him last year. That was phenomenal after being shot in the chest just a few weeks before the season even started. So for him to come back from that was phenomenal. And then, Ian, you have the added piece of Deebo Samuel. For the second time, he requested a trade, I think in 3 years. This time, though, they probably looked back and they said, yeah, your numbers weren't great. You didn't have a great season. So now we're going to be willing. If you can find us a trade partner, maybe he's going to be out of there. And I think that obviously is a big piece to this conversation. But with Ricky Pearsall, again, same kind of question. What did you see last season? And let's assume maybe Deebo Samuel's out of the equation for 2025. What are your expectations for him?
Yeah, I mean, not only did Pearsall come back from the gunshot wound, but remember, he had that hamstring injury in July that really sapped all of his ability to get on the same page with Purdy and just work inside of his first NFL training camp. So, again, the fact that we did get those two stretches, down the end, 141 yards and a touchdown in week 17, another nice, 69 yards and a touchdown in week 18. So that did come, obviously, with Deebo not doing much in the offense, Ayuk out and CMC out. But you said it looks like Deebo might be on, his just ending of the, narrative there in San Fran. And also Brandon Ayuk, unfortunately, with that ACL plus injury, he might be someone that's not going to be starting in the beginning of the year. So still, San Francisco, it's not going to be the Ricky Pearsall show. We still got Jawan Jennings, George Kittle, and CMC out there. But I do think we started to see some of the, just love for Pearsall. That made him a first-round pick in the first place, showing that ability to separate, showing those incredible hands he had. I mean, this dude is a one-handed catch merchant, even going back to his days, at Florida and everything. So I'm optimistic here. That said, it was weird seeing Pearsall come back from the gunshot wound and the hamstring stuff, actually flash. I think he had a long catch and run against the Cowboys in one of those teams, first 2 games back. Then he goes 3 straight weeks without catching a pass. So that would just be, I guess, my concern here, because are we really sure he's going to immediately work as this number 1 wide receiver, or is he going to be behind Kittle, behind Jennings, behind CMC, and then once he's healthy, be behind Brandon Ayuk? Because we're going to talk about some other guys here soon, Kendall, where, I do think we need to sit down before the season and just say, okay, this wide receiver who's being drafted, we'll see where Pearsall ends up going, but top 30, top 36, we're drafting this guy as a legit wide receiver 3 when he might be the 4th or 5th pass game option in his own offense. So again, not so much down the talent or anything, but just based on what we saw last year and based on what we're expecting out of what will probably still be a run-first offense in 2025, I have a hard time envisioning too big of a boom scenario here for Pearsall.
Yeah, that's the tougher part with the 49ers. It's like the rich always get richer, and we talk about that and we say, we love George Kittle. George Kittle, for everything that it's worth, had the season that I thought Deebo Samuel was going to have once Brandon Ayuk went down. I don't know about you, but he went down and I had a good amount of Deebo Samuel, and I said, oh, finally, we don't want it. Now listen, we don't want injuries, but it was one of those situations where I was like, okay, finally, we're going to see Deebo Samuel step up. And he was just... it was awful, Ian. There was never a good point in that season. You had to potentially just look at him and say, do I bench him? And I know that's a tough conversation for a lot of people to have when they look at draft capital and they say, well, I spent this pick on him. I can't do that. But that's where we were at with Deebo Samuel last season. So Brock Purdy too, I mean, for everything we look at, he played well last season with the lack of weapons there. So you have to think that, okay, Brock Purdy is probably going to be drafted as a top 10 quarterback and he'll have a better season. And then that just means hopefully spreading the ball around, spreading some love to Ricky Pearsall. But there's still just a ton of weapons, even with Deebo Samuel leaving.
I do like to shout out for Brock Purdy, because I'm old enough to remember in 2023, Kendall, when we had that 3-game sample size with no Deebo or Trent Williams, and it was like, oh, look, he's just a sum of its parts, starter quarterback. Yeah. Brock Purdy last year, even with all those injuries and the ineffective Deebo Samuel, 3rd in yards per attempt among any quarterback out there. So previous to last year, he was freaking 1st in everything, which it always killed me how we could kind of get the side-by-side graphics with Brock Purdy and Jimmy Garoppolo. That was supposed to be an insult, because Garoppolo, during San Fran was one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the NFL. So I know a lot of that has to do with the weapons and has to do with the system, but it is a situation where attached to Brock Purdy, we should at least be willing to reinvest in this offense. So the Deebo thing is interesting. I wonder if we just see him get cut at this point. But I also wonder, Kendall, he did have that pneumonia trip to the hospital and just never really seemed to be his explosive self afterwards. So it is a sort of player where I know he's never exactly been, the ace separator to begin with. But, man, to see a guy go, I think he was literally 1st or 2nd in yards per attempt, rushing, during the first 5 or 6 years of his career, become one of the least efficient players with the ball in his hands, really, one of the biggest mysteries of last season.
Yeah, and it just wasn't good. I mean, he's dropped off since when you talked about like 2021, I think, and he's got 15.87 million cap charge. It's a crowded offense, like I said. So this was his second trade request, and after last season, they were like, "Yeah, you know what? We saw the drop off. It's okay. Maybe they get someone." I don't know though. I think the San Francisco 49ers are actually the betting favorite, the odds-on favorite to keep Deebo Samuel. So this could be. I mean, if they keep him, is this conversation with Ricky Pearsall? Do you just keep pushing him down the depth chart? Like, could he do enough for you to jump Deebo?
I think it depends. Is Deebo going to change his number back to 19? That's when we got to start, wondering if he can really get that swagger back over here. But look, I think they're probably playing, different positions, to an extent in this offense. It's not like they're expecting Deebo to win, in the intermediate areas like they would with Pearsall. I think honestly, like Pearsall really will be benefiting more than anything from Brandon Ayuk missing, a portion of next season. So hopefully he is good to go. But Deebo a bit more in that, just Yaxter sort of role. So don't think that overlap is going to be too much here. But again, I'll say it 20 million times this offseason. Don't hate the player, hate the ADP. And at least early on in the year, I could see Pearsall being one of those guys where it's like, okay, you're drafting him as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. Maybe get this wide receiver 2 value early on with Ayuk out of the picture. Just have a harder time, imagining us sitting there in November, December saying, man, Ricky Pearsall, league winner. But hey, Kendall, I've been wrong once or twice over the years, here and there. We'll see what happens this time.
We're never wrong. We're just early. Ricky Pearsall right now, this is best ball. This is underdog. It's way different than your traditional redraft league. So keep that in mind. They push wide receivers up a lot. Round 8, pick 85. So around Jacoby, around Khalil Shakir. Jawan Jennings only going 3 spots ahead of him. Josh Downs, Cooper Kupp. That's the range right now.
And that is the tricky part. Like, Jawan was objectively more productive and the better wide receiver last year. And we still just kind of let these, first round guys linger on that, first round draft capital for quite some time. So, hey, it is legal in the year 2025 for football players to get better as they learn the ropes, get more experience and everything. But man, with Pearsall just again, seems like maybe putting a bit too much stock behind that draft capital. Like Kendall, if he would have gone 6 picks later, in the early part of round 2, are we really, having these same sort of high expectations? I don't know.
Exactly. Probably not. But that's how we like to overreact a little bit. That's what we do for fantasy football. So that's what we're known for. Before we continue on with some guys that we think could bounce back in 2025, let's hear from our friends over at Bud Light.
Hey, you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done. Oh,
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
Continuing on here with, I know I love that commercial, with potential bounce back players. Oh, yeah.
Kendall, real quick. Apparently, Shane Gillis' mom was like, oh, Post Malone seems like such a nice guy. Can we have him over to hang out? And Shane's like, Mom, that was 6 months ago. Like, no, I can't just invite Post Malone over. But we'll see if it gets out to him. Seems like a cool guy. Maybe the Gillis family hosts Post Malone one.
Wait, that's hilarious. She just thought like it was a couple days ago. You're like, oh, if you guys are still together right now, like.
She's like, have the boys over. It'll be just like high school again,
Let's go. I love that. That's actually
shout out moms.
That's hilarious. Shout out to moms. We love moms. Anyway, let's continue on with our potential bounce backs from 2025, looking at some of these guys. Can you believe in the year, again, Ian, you just said it, 2025, we are actually going to be talking about Panthers players in a good way, potentially. Xavier Legette, Jatavian Sanders here, you can see on your screen. Legette finished wide receiver 73, Sanders tight end 39. But let's start with Xavier Legette. For everything that people can say about the Panthers, there was a turnaround with Bryce Young, and Dave Canales, I think, did a great job where you take Bryce Young out of the spotlight for a couple weeks, you go in there with Andy Dalton, and then you let him come back. And they're really, it didn't show in the win column, but they were taking the Kansas City Chiefs on the ropes. They were going into overtime with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So for everything that someone could say about the Panthers, they did turn things around. Maybe not in wins, but Bryce Young looked better.
Yeah, I mean, look, he never wanted anyone to get in a car crash, but maybe that fender bender Andy Dalton, got in, actually helped the Panthers out in the long term, getting Bryce Young another chance to show what he could do out there. But seriously, I mean, Bryce Young was fantastic, down the stretch. Not saying he was top 5, top 6 quarterback in the league, but the big time throws were actually up there tied, or I think he was only behind Joe Burrow after taking back over in week 8. And just, again, cannot overstate how much of an improvement it was, because previously we were talking about, one of the biggest busts of all all time. And as much as it's easy to say, like, oh, look, Jared Goff, overcame it and he came back. A lot of other quarterbacks, in that range who just never managed to get anything going. So certainly feeling better about Bryce and company moving forward. The question, Kendall, is did Xavier Legette, and, we'll talk about Ja'Tavion Sanders here in a minute as well, really have all that much to do with it? Because just like, Bryce Young was in some bad company when he was, not putting up good numbers as a rookie, we are seeing that with Xavier Legette as well. And you kind of think about his run out and what happened. I mean, with Pearsall and Marvin and some of these other guys, we were able to explain the lack of production a little bit more. But with Legette, I mean, coming out, he was an older prospect, a bit of a one-hit wonder, over down at South Carolina. And again, for Deontay Johnson to get traded before October was over, for Adam Thielen to miss 7 games in the season, Legette really did have every chance to become a guy in this offense. It just never quite happened. So wound up finishing with under 500 yards despite, playing every game. Had the wrist injury going on. We also saw him, a bit of a scooter, over at down by the Super Bowl, Kendall. So I'm not exactly sure what was going on there with Legette. But again, here is just a list of some of the different players that finished under 500 yards as a rookie, despite being a first-round pick. Devontae Parker, Henry Ruggs, Treylon Burks, Quentin Johnson, Kadarius Toney, Corey Coleman, Pearsall, Jalen Reagor, Corey Davis, Nelson Aguilar, Philip Dorsett, Mike Williams, Josh Dotson, Jameson Williams, Laquan Treadwell, John Ross, Brashad Perryman, and of course, Kevin White. It's not great, okay? There's a couple names in there. Maybe it turns into Mike Williams. Maybe Devontae Parker, is going to be that trajectory. But again, it's not like Legette coming out was like this absolute can't-miss prospect to begin with. And, only one data point, only 1 year's worth of, action so far. But didn't exactly look great out there. And when we just kind of compare him to guys like a Keon Coleman, who I know we'll get to in a little bit as well, like Ricky Pearsall, I don't think Legette really looked better than any of them. So, overall last year, in terms of separating ability, this was the worst offense in the NFL, looking at ESPN's open scores. So, Legette right now, I kind of lean a bit more towards him being part of the problem, Kendall, as opposed to being a solution to it.
And there were drops, Ian, right? I mean, there were like 7 drops that and I remember Steve Smith Sr., I think it was yesterday or whatever, came out and had a quote about Legette saying that he thinks that he lost a little bit of confidence in catching the football because of the drops. And you can see it sometimes in the way that he was attacking the ball, whatever. But I mean, 2 of them were like big time plays where they could have helped change the game for the Panthers. But I think
that Eagles game
7,
lost it.
Yes. But overall 7, and we would just sit back and be like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So the drops were huge for him.
And it's one of those things where drops year over year on a very sticky stat, but they matter, okay? And I know the coaches don't like seeing them pop up as well. So Legette's certainly, supposed to be one of these just, contested catch demons, the players capable of making, a 50-50 proposition, more of like a 70-30, scenario in their favor. So not saying he can't improve, still a fairly young player in the grand scheme of things. But again, just kind of looking at the offense, we're fully expecting Carolina to go out there and try to add at least 1 or if not more, wide receivers to the picture. And again, just objectively, 1 year and 12 months, Jalen Coker was the better wide receiver in this group. So shout out to all of our Coke heads out there. Hopefully Legette can get his crap together, but not good. And just again, that archetype more and more into year 2025, Kendall, when we have players who every time they get hit up high is drawing a flag to begin with. We can see the Tank Dells of the world, the 165, 170 pound Devonta Smith sort of wide receivers really make more of a living. I do think as sticky in coverage as a lot of these cornerbacks have become, maybe the contested catch artists just aren't quite what they used to be.
Let's go over to Ja'Tavion Sanders here. Again, on your screen, you can see finished overall tight end 39, 4.6 fantasy points per game. Are you going to say nice things about Ja'Tavion Sanders? Is he the sleeper tight end that you want to target in drafts this year?
So I could see it a little bit more. I mean, certainly it's going to be a, better chance, I think, for him to just have that full-time role and be a lot cheaper here in fantasy land, which is important. But both Tommy Tremble and Ian Thomas are going to be free agents. So if anything, Sanders might have a chance to actually be hopefully healthy or not have that midseason injury and run away with the starting role. So haven't seen Dave Canales over the years overly lean on his tight ends and everything. But Sanders is someone who I know coming out of Texas, a lot of people almost considered more of a big slot receiver receiver in the first place. And he did flash at least a little bit, seeing some of the big yak plays he made. Had a nice contested catch against Kansas City and just, again, hurdling dudes against the Saints. So saw enough from Sanders where, hey, Kendall, maybe we are looking at someone where, not saying he'll necessarily be a top 5 tight end like Jonnu Smith, but once you get past those top 20 or so players at the position, you can do a lot worse than someone who legit has a chance to have, again, a near full-time role. And I do think that is in Sanders' potential range of outcomes.
Maybe a waiver wire hero. I can see it now already. I can picture it, Ian. Week 2, and we're writing him up for waiver wire names to know, and then he just helps you, like a Jonnu Smith, like you just said, maybe helps you down the stretch. Maybe probably not that kind of finish, but we could dream over here. Let's go to Keon Coleman. This was, I don't know if it was more disappointing because we fell in love with him in the draft process and he was funny. We like to, journalists, the media, we all like to just kind of cling on to someone like that, and he was hilarious. He had great videos come out, and it was like everyone it felt like they were rooting for him, and everyone was, but didn't necessarily mean that he returned any kind of fantasy value. You can see it on the screen here. Wide receiver 64, 8.6 fantasy points per game for Keon Coleman. Do you see a bounce back for 2025?
I think we can paint a picture a bit easier with Keon than with some of these other guys. Because again, quarterback, not a problem. We all love Josh Allen and what he's capable of bringing to the table. Amari Cooper and Mac Hollins entering free agency. And those were the guys that were forcing us into being a bit more of a rotation, down the stretch of the season. Khalil Shakur, really the only full-time, receiver in this offense that kept rotating dudes. And unfortunately for Keon, like a big part of his season kind of falling apart was an unfortunate wrist injury that, again, kept him sidelined for a large chunk after he really seemed to just be getting going. Had a nice game against your Seahawks and was looking like a player who could, again, both create at the catch point, make these crazy contested catches, as everyone saw from him back at Florida State, one of the best highlight reels coming out, but also surprisingly adept after the catch as well. I think that's going to be the key part that maybe hopefully he can build on to become the more complete actual number 1 receiver, as opposed to that, sacrificial deep ball X that only gets 4 or 5 targets per game. But love our friends over at Next Gen Stats. And last season, Kendall, the number 1 player in the NFL in terms of yards after the catch above expected, Keon Coleman. So I do think, a bit untapped. He's only turning 22 years old in May. So I think we might actually have something here.
Do you think, okay, let me throw this at you, because I read a lot, and we know coming into the draft process, right? People were like, okay, he struggles to separate. It was all over the evaluation, but then they say, okay, he makes up for it for what he's not able to do there with his ball skills after the catch ability. Do you see them changing his role? Because a lot of people that we read and that we like to follow said, well, this perimeter field stretcher role isn't really fit for him. Could we see him change?
I think he could just get more opportunities in that role. And we honestly started to see a little bit of spurts with that. Ultimately, it's up to Josh Allen to throw him the football, right? And like you saw some of these plays, I think it was against the it was the Jets game where Josh Allen rolling out to his right, just tosses it up in the end zone. Keon comes down with it. That ridiculous throw he had against the Lions where Keon was already like 60 yards downfield and Josh told him to go further. He came down with it. So you started to see that level of trust emerge. Again, I think injuries just got in the way of us, seeing that really flourish down the stretch. So, hey, if Buffalo does, decide to bring back both Mac and Amari, ahead of next season, that could complicate things a little bit. But I do think with Keon, that basketball background, I mean, this is a sort of raw talent, but has all, the attributes that we look for that maybe just needs a little bit more time in the shop. So again, just trying to really hopefully, pick all these players from good offense if we can help it. That's checked. We have a player certainly with plenty of good draft capital, just 1 pick outside the first round. We got that going for us. We saw the flashes, just need a bit more consistency. But I'll say, Kendall, the fact that Keon is probably going to be the cheapest one in the group that we've been talking about out of, all these names so far at projected cost, I'm probably the most in on Keon.
Oh, okay. I like that, because the other question always for the Bills is, okay, they need another superstar wide receiver. Like we talked to a lot of guys last week in New Orleans, Hall of Famers for them and former players. And it was like, what do they need to get over the hump? And it was, I shouldn't say surprising that a lot of them said they need a true wide receiver, but they could look at this past season and say they were so close. Like maybe they don't, maybe the formula is working and they just continue on with James Cook. That's the only guy we really like to take early in drafts, and same with Josh Allen, and call it a day. But, it will be interesting if they do move on from, like you said, Mac Hollins, if they move on from Amari Cooper, who for all intents and purposes was like on a milk carton for the time that he was there. Like you did not see him. There had to have been more going on with him than I think was not said or maybe reported. But yeah, there's open opportunity, I think is what I'm trying to say. Khalil Shakir was pretty good for fantasy, but it just feels like that team where they're going to, like you just said, they're going to be cheap wide receivers, and we're really only going to target James Cook again and Josh Allen and get these guys for cheap.
Yeah, James Cook's certainly not going to be very, very cheap out there.
No.
Also wants to get his $15 million per year.
15,
so good for you.
Ian, you and I want 15. We forgot to say we want 15 million per year. So we're just throwing it out there that if anyone's listening, we would like to request 15 million per year. They don't have to give that to him. He's under contract. They don't need to do that.
They could give it to us. That's true, Kendall. But I don't like Bills Mafia, going at James about this. This has been one of the most soft-spoken players on the team. Just does nothing but ball out. Yeah, you score freaking 20 touchdowns, whatever it was. Pay the man some money. Why not?
He knows he's not going to do it again, so he's like, "Wait, can you please pay me now? Because the touchdown regression is coming, and I don't want to have to do this." It's true. All right, so Keon Coleman, you're kind of in on him. That's the overall take here. Kind of in, depending on where he goes in drafts, like a little bit in on Keon Coleman for 2025.
Again, any of these players, I think we're kind of going to be trying to check the same 4 boxes, and we can have all these different stats and film evaluations to get there. But their offensive environment, yeah, absolutely. That's going great for Keon. The overall player talent, mention it, yards after the catch ability and that contested catch. This is my ball. I'm, bigger and better than you. He's got that going for himself as well. How's the quarterback? Yeah, he might be the single best quarterback in the NFL. And Josh Allen at least played like and got the MVP award last year. And then the target competition. I mean, who are we really afraid of in this offense that could actually stop Keon from getting loads of targets? The answer is Amari Cooper and to a lesser extent Matt Collins, but again, they might not even be there. So yeah, last year we saw more of a spread out approach, but are we really going to do the Dalton Kincaid thing again? That's who we think is going to be taking away stuff from Keon? I don't think so. And again, Keon just with that brain meld Josh Allen, because Josh has even talked about it, he's got the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. There's you see these plays where Josh wants to just air the ball out, take a risk downfield, and Keon is the guy that most fits into that. So I'm feeling good. More we talk, Kendall, the more I just want to, get over the underdog right now and start drafting more Keon Coleman.
Don't you love when that happens? You're like, I'm talking myself into it. Let's go draft right now. Let's see if that same thing holds true for Adonai Mitchell. Adonai Mitchell over there with, it's tough. I mean, how can we talk about him without talking about Anthony Richardson and what your expectations are for him? But you see it on the screen, Adonai Mitchell with 36% route participation rate in 2024. What are your expectations for him for 2025?
He's basically, I think, Dontavian Wicks 2.0. And sadly, I don't think I mean that in a very good way. This is, mentioned it earlier in the show, but okay. With AD Mitchell, we kind of did this last year. We made this mistake with AD and Dontavian Wicks. He's going to be the wide receiver 4 unless he just actively beats out one of the starters. And I don't think any of the starters in Indianapolis are bad wide receivers. Alec Pierce does the role they ask him to do as that field stretcher, contested catch artist in the end zone sometimes as well as possible. He just led the team in receiving yards. I know he's Alec Pierce, so we act like he doesn't matter, but he goes out there and does exactly what the Colts want him to do. Very good fit with Anthony Richardson. Josh Downs, brother of, star Ohio State and national championship winning safety. Caleb Downs going out there, being a slot maven, shifty after the catch, gives him that yak ability. He's fantastic. And then we got $70 million man Michael Pittman. I don't want to draft handcuff wide receivers in fantasy, Kendall. I think that's what AD Mitchell is right now. So look, I'll put my film, ball knower hat on. I get it. The guy separates, and it is fantastic to see. Was 8th in ESPN's open score last year. Haven't gotten the time to, put together my just sheesh video of all the overthrows. Believe me, there were plenty with him last year, but it really is just a situation with AD Mitchell where, similar to what we were talking about with Marvin Harrison Jr. earlier, what is really going to change next year? Is Anthony Richardson going to start completing 65% of his passes? I kind of doubt it. Is one of the Colts wide receivers going to instantly fall out of favor? Doesn't really seem like it. So you're putting a lot of stock into pretty much at this point pre-draft evaluations that Mitchell should be a bigger producer in the NFL. And unfortunately, just wasn't the case last season. So when I look at this Colts offense, again, we'll see how all the costs shake out. But for me, it's Jonathan Taylor. It's maybe a dart throw to Anthony Richardson. But these wide receivers probably just going to be staying away again unless they're dirt cheap.
Yeah, and I think in the best outcomes, right? It's that Richardson's completion percentage, like you just said, goes up. But for his career, you wrote it out in your team needs, which everyone can go and check out at fantasylife.com. But you wrote it out 50.6 completion percentage, fifth lowest mark among 210 quarterbacks, Ian. Like, we can go on with the bad stats. And so if you think that it gets better, I don't know how big of a jump that's going to be. And then you just named all the other wide receivers ahead of him. So are they really going to say, all right, well, Anthony Richardson's getting better and it's going to be Adonai Mitchell that has the best outcome out of all of them? I agree with you where I have a hard time thinking that. I think flyers for Adonai Mitchell, when we were looking at him on the waiver wire last year, it was like, okay, I'm really desperate and maybe this is the week that Anthony Richardson can change. But I'm with you on this one where no matter how cheap it is, I don't know how much of this offense we're even going to want in 2025 to start things off.
And I want to be in on the guy because he makes, the 15-yard comeback route just look so much prettier than a lot of these other players out there. And that does matter. It doesn't really matter in fantasy. We get the same amount of points either way. But he's a good football player and everything. He's only turning 23 next October. Not completely out on the guy, but at least ahead of next season. Again, just so tough with all the continuity across the board to imagine a scenario where he is truly going to break out in a meaningful way. So if anything, I think Michael Pittman is the guy we should be giving a little bit more slack, because this dude was playing through a broken back for a large portion of the season. I mean, what was it, Kendall? Week 7 or week 8, we got the report like Michael Pittman likely to go on IR. Now Friday, it's like, no, actually, JK is going to be playing out here on Friday. So got to remember with some of these players, we're really good about paying attention to the injuries the week they happen. We got the questionable tag. Okay, we got to talk about them and all that. But once they start playing through the issue and a couple of weeks go by, tends to go to the back of our minds. So Michael Pittman, if we are going to have the chance to kind of draft all these guys around the same price point, he'd probably be my better bet.
And you might be adding to this offense too. Like, they could get Tyler Warren in the draft, tight end out of Penn State. So Thor, that's where he has him mocked up to go, so that they've got the 14th overall pick. So then you add another weapon in, and you're like, okay, wait, now you just keep pushing Adonai Mitchell down. So it's something to definitely watch for here. Let's continue on here with bounce back players for 2025. These two are interesting because I know Blake Corum got the hype last year. It was like, oh yeah, Blake Corum's going to come in and going to totally exceed expectations. Trey Benson, maybe not in the same range, but let's start with Benson because we've talked about the Arizona Cardinals so far. What do you think for Trey Benson? You think he's going to have a bounce back season?
Maybe. He could be a handcuff, and that's, could be awesome. But all right, Chase Brown this last year, he was a 0 RB, there's delight and all this stuff going on. Look how well he did the second half of the year. We just always leave out the fact that Zach Moss got put on IR with a neck injury. It was a bad pick in the first 8 weeks of the season, but all of a sudden, once you remove the starting running back from the equation, everything worked out great. And 2024 was one of these weird years where, for once, Kendall, we didn't have a ton of running backs dropping like flies throughout the year. So Chase Brown's success stood out that much more. So I get it. He still did have a role, alongside Zach Moss and stuff. And he was around like the RB 30 or something first 8 weeks of the year. Wasn't completely killing you, but Trey Benson and Blake Corum, these were rookies who were getting boosted up, I believe, a little bit in their draft capital, and at least in fantasy land, because of the idea that, okay, James Conner getting a little bit older, Trey Benson, super athlete, he can have a chance to really challenge Conner for that role, maybe get some pass down work. That didn't happen at all. In fact, we saw Amari DiMercato and Michael Carter both get more targets than Benson even managed last year. And James Conner, who just got a nice little contract extension at the end of the year, isn't going anywhere. And our other guy here with Blake Corum, it's the same thing. How many fumbles does Kyron Williams need to have before Sean McVay looks elsewhere? The limit doesn't exist, Kendall, apparently, because, again, tied for the league lead over these past 2 seasons. He's not been efficient at all. Successful? Yes, kind of in that Chiefs manner of things. Like, they pick up positive yardage, and I'm not trying to, completely diminish that ability, but again, if you had to just have a run out in your mind, going to last year, like how can Blake Corum go ahead and take Kyron Williams' job? You would say, okay, well, maybe Blake's just super inefficient as a receiver and as a rusher, and he's fumbling every other week. That all happened, and it still just didn't matter for Blake Corum. So, hey, it could be a situation where, again, James Conner, unfortunately, I'm knocking on wood, let's say he wins the lottery in October, okay, and he misses the last 3 months of the year. Yeah, Trey Benson could step right up, kind of get in that Ray Davis sort of role where maybe he's not, the second man up during a normal week, but he is a direct handcuff you want to have. I can get behind that scenario. Same thing with Blake Corum. God forbid something happens to Kyron Williams. I think Blake would have a very similar role, and we would probably be ranking him pretty similarly to how we feel about Kyron. But again, pure handcuff plays. And I think we're going to be looking at these draft boards going, why is someone like Tyler Algier going 3 rounds after these guys? I do think the rookie, bias, and then just kind of carries over year is a big cause for that.
Yeah, I agree with you on the pure handcuff basis. And that's what we try to do though in that range of drafts anyway, is we try and throw those darts and hit on a guy that, while we don't want injuries, could step up if it did happen. So for James Conner, he was oddly healthy last year. That is no shade to James Conner, but he really was oddly healthy. I did not expect that. And then the new contract, like you said, runs through 2026. So you could tell yourself a story. Maybe he gets cut after next season. They save $8 million, and with them knowing that, they try and go, let's say, bring a Trey Benson a little bit more work, bring an Amari DiMercado a little bit more work to see what they have. But I'm with you with the pure handcuffs. Blake Corum, listen, I can't, Ian, I can't do it again. I not necessarily faded Kyron Williams, but I did not pick him in fantasy football. I was just like, I'd rather go elsewhere, and I can't do it again, Ian. It's just I can't do it. I apologize, Kyron Williams. I'll never do that again.
And look, I'm not trying to be the whole, he got drafted in round 5, he's overrated. Kyron Williams is a very good NFL running back. I get it. But, with Sean McVay, no, it wasn't the punt return thing, that unofficial depth chart. I don't care about that. But when we hear McVay and, their GM talking all offseason about drafting Corum because they wanted to try to take some touches away from Kyron, and they just saw the interchangeability between them, I think that's what I bought a little bit too much into. So more than anything, I just think we got to be careful with these rookies, particularly even if they have the day 2 value. Don't assume there's going to be standalone value there. And that's the only part, I think, Kendall, where we maybe missed the ball a little bit, because again, not like they were, these super cheap options in the draft. They were kind of going around that RB3 range, and you're going to see these other handcuffs in the Tyler Algier mold, for example, that again are going rounds later, when in reality, God forbid something happened to Bijan, we'd be ranking these guys right next to each other. So nothing as Benson and Corum, I think they'd be instant, RB1, RB2 types if an injury happens. But you know what, Kendall? I'm old enough to remember something named Zonovan Knight was getting, top 15 treatment here for a little bit. I
forgot about him. Thank you for bringing that back.
Had a couple nice weeks, with all due respect to Zonovan Knight.
He did. Kind of, sure. I mean, so did Kendre Miller, and then his coaching staff hated him, so he's gone. What are we doing? It just does blow my mind when you listen. It's like the Coach Speak Index Twitter account. For everything that we've been told, it's okay, they love Blake Corum, and then it's wrong. We're just wrong, and we actually hate him. Like I just said, Kendre Miller with Dennis Allen. Don't know what the hell was wrong with that, but he was a handcuff that we were maybe, and then no, it never came to be.
I think Ray Davis could really be someone who's not going to be getting the hype. Why? Because he was a 5th round draft pick instead of a 3rd round draft pick, even though, let's face it, we already actually have that data point that we didn't get with Benson and Corum. The one game, oh my God, that pissed me off on Monday night. The one game without James Cook, Ray Davis took over, looked fantastic. And maybe Benson and Corum could do that, but I hope we'll know someday. Right now we don't.
Ray Davis. I don't know. They were using him too. I could see it. Sorry, James Conner. We love you. We want you to get that 15 million, but just got to look over your shoulder a little bit here. All right. Appreciate everyone hanging out with us today. Again, you can go and find all of Ian's articles at fantasylife.com, 100% free. And while you're there, subscribe to that newsletter, also 100% free. Those were our potential bounce back players for 2025. We'll see you next time.